There is a version of you that wakes up and gets to work without negotiating with yourself. He does the hard thing first. He does not spend 20 minutes scrolling before starting. He does not need to feel motivated before moving. That version of you is not a fantasy. It is not reserved for exceptionally disciplined people. It is available to you, but not through the method most people try. Not through forcing yourself harder. Not through building stricter routines. Not through another attempt at willpower that lasts 4 days and then collapses. The reason those approaches keep failing is simple. They are fighting the brain instead of working with it, and the brain always wins that fight. Here is what nobody explains clearly enough. Hard things do not feel hard because you are weak. They feel hard because your brain has done a calculation. It has looked at the effort required and the reward expected, and decided the numbers do not add up. That is it. Not a character flaw, not a discipline problem, a calculation. And here is what matters most. Calculations can be changed, which means the feeling of effort, the heaviness, the resistance, the "I'll do it later," is not fixed. It is a variable. And this video is about how to change it. Think about the last time something felt genuinely effortless. Not easy in the sense that it required no skill, but effortless in the sense that you wanted to do it, that you moved toward it without resistance. That time passed without you noticing. That is not an accident. That is your brain in a state of high anticipated reward, and your brain has been spending a lot of time in that state lately. Just pointed at the wrong things. Every time you open your phone and scroll, your brain receives a rapid, unpredictable stream of small rewards, a funny video, an interesting post, something surprising, something that makes you feel something, each one small, but coming fast enough and unpredictably enough to keep the reward system highly engaged. This is the same mechanism behind every addiction ever studied. Not the substance itself, the pattern of reward. Fast, unpredictable, low effort, high stimulation. And your brain, which is not making moral judgments, only efficiency calculations, begins to calibrate around this pattern. It starts expecting reward to arrive quickly. It starts expecting effort to be low. And when something asks for the opposite, sustained effort, delayed reward, discomfort before payoff, the brain does not just feel neutral about it, it resists, actively. Not because the task is impossible, but because against its newly calibrated baseline, the task feels disproportionately expensive. This is why sitting down to work feels harder after scrolling for 20 minutes. This is why starting a new habit feels impossible in the first week. This is why the harder you try to force discipline through willpower alone, the more exhausting it becomes. You are not fighting laziness. You are fighting a brain that has been optimized for a different kind of reward. And until that optimization changes, effort will always feel like a battle. Here is the part most people never hear. Wanting is not random. It is manufactured by your brain, based on what it has learned to anticipate. There is a mechanism in the brain, you do not need to know its technical name, that releases a chemical signal not when you receive a reward, but when you anticipate one. When your brain predicts that something is about to feel good, it releases that signal in advance. And that signal is what creates the feeling of wanting. The pull toward something, the motivation to move. This is why you feel hungry when you smell food. Why you feel excited before a trip, not just during it. Why the anticipation of something good often feels better than the thing itself. Your brain is not waiting for the reward to arrive. It is responding to the prediction. And predictions are learned. They are built through repetition. Every time you do something, and it is followed by a reward, your brain updates its prediction model. Next time the situation occurs, a reward is likely, and it begins releasing that anticipation signal earlier and earlier, until eventually, the situation itself, before any reward has arrived, produces the feeling of wanting. This is how habits form. This is how preferences develop. This is how some people genuinely enjoy things that others find miserable. They are not different people with different characters. They are people whose brains have built different predictions. Which means this: the feeling of wanting to do hard things is not something you are born with, or not. It is something that can be built through the same mechanism that built your current preferences: repetition. Before we get to how to build it, you need to understand one more thing, because most people who try to change their relationship with effort make the same mistake. They try to go from 0 to everything at once. They decide they are going to wake up at 5 in the morning, work out, do deep work for 4 hours, and eat perfectly on day 1, after months or years of a very different pattern. And two things happen. First, the brain experiences a massive mismatch between expected reward and actual reward. The effort is enormous. The results are invisible. The reward system does not fire, and the brain registers the experience as a loss. Second, the contrast between the new behavior and the existing calibration is so extreme that the resistance is overwhelming. Everything feels difficult. Everything requires conscious energy. Everything is a fight, and after a few days, the brain does what brains do when something is consistently unrewarding. It stops cooperating. The motivation disappears. The streak breaks. And the person concludes what they always conclude: that they are not disciplined enough, that they lack the willpower others seem to have, that they are simply not built for this. None of that is true. What actually happened is much simpler. They tried to change the output without changing the calibration. They tried to behave like a different person without first teaching their brain to expect different rewards, and that order of operations does not work. You cannot sustain behavior that your brain consistently experiences as unrewarding. Not for long. Not without constant, exhausting force. Which is why the approach has to be different, not harder, smarter. The shift begins with one principle. Stop fighting the reward system. Start using it. Your brain is not your enemy. It is an incredibly powerful optimization machine that is currently pointed at the wrong targets. Your job is not to override it. Your job is to redirect it. And redirection happens through a process that is simpler than most people expect, but slower than most people want. Step 1. Start small. This is where most people's instinct is exactly wrong. They want to start with something significant, something that feels like it matters, something proportional to how badly they want to change. But the brain does not care about significance. It cares about reward, and a small action completed, even a very small one, registers as a reward. A prediction was made. A behavior occurred. A completion happened. The signal fires, and the prediction model updates. This task leads to completion. Completion feels like something. Do it again tomorrow, and the model updates further and further, until the brain begins anticipating the reward of completion before the task even starts, which is the exact feeling you are trying to build. Not discipline, anticipation. Start with something so small it feels almost embarrassing. Not because small things change your life directly, but because small things change your brain's relationship with effort. And that relationship is what determines everything else. Step 2. Protect the completion. This is the piece most people skip. They start the task, but they do not protect the finish. They get interrupted. They stop halfway. They do something else before the task is complete. And the brain, which was building toward a completion signal, does not get it. The prediction fails. The model does not update the way it needs to. Every incomplete task is a missed calibration opportunity. Every completion, however small, is a calibration event. Your brain is watching, not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, statistical way. It is tracking patterns. It is learning what leads to completion and what does not. And it is adjusting its predictions accordingly. Protect your completions. Finish what you start. Not because discipline demands it, but because your brain is taking notes. Step 3. Close the gap between effort and reward. One of the reasons hard work feels unrewarding is that the rewards are distant. You work today. The result arrives in weeks or months, and the brain, which is calibrating based on immediate feedback, struggles to connect the two. This is not a flaw. It is how the reward system works. It is highly responsive to immediate signals, less responsive to distant ones, which means one of the most practical things you can do is create immediate signals, not fake ones, not empty celebration, but genuine moments of acknowledgement after completion. The task is done. Something registers. A moment of stillness. A note made. Something that closes the loop between effort and signal. This sounds trivial. It is not. The brain is pattern matching constantly. Every time effort is followed by even a small positive signal, the association strengthens. Effort leads to something. Over time, that association becomes an expectation, and expectations become wanting. Step 4. Raise the floor gradually. Once the brain begins building a relationship with completion, once small tasks begin feeling rewarding rather than neutral, something important becomes possible. Expansion, not in one dramatic leap, but in the way a muscle responds to progressive load. Slightly more than last time, just enough to require adaptation. Not so much that the system breaks. The person who starts with 10 minutes of focused work and completes it consistently is not in the same place after 3 weeks as the person who tried to do 4 hours on day 1 and quit by day 3. They are further, not because they did more each day, but because their brain's relationship with that kind of work has been quietly, consistently, reliably changing. The resistance has been lowering. The anticipation has been building. And now, when they sit down to work, the feeling is different. Not effortless, but closer to wanting than fighting, which changes everything about how long they can sustain it. There is a specific moment people describe when this process starts working. It is not dramatic. It does not feel like a transformation. It feels more like noticing an absence. The thing that used to resist, that heaviness before starting, that constant negotiation, is slightly quieter than it was. Not gone, quieter. And then a few weeks later, quieter still. And at some point they realize they have started something. A work session, a difficult task, something that used to require enormous preparation and convincing. And they did not think about it first. They just started. Not because they forced themselves, not because the motivation struck at the right moment, but because their brain had recalibrated enough that starting simply felt like the next natural thing. That is what craving hard things actually feels like. Not the dramatic hunger of addiction, not an obsessive need to suffer, just the quiet absence of resistance, just the brain treating effort as normal rather than exceptional, just showing up, becoming something you do rather than something you fight. This is available, not through a heroic act of will, through repetition in the right direction, small enough to complete, consistent enough to compound, patient enough to let the brain catch up. There is one additional factor that changes how quickly this process works. And it is the least discussed element in every conversation about discipline and habit. Meaning, not purpose in the grand philosophical sense, just the brain's sense that what it is doing connects to something that matters to the person doing it. When the brain perceives meaning in an action, when it registers that this effort connects to something genuinely valued, the anticipation signal fires more strongly. The reward feels bigger. The calibration happens faster. This is why people who are deeply invested in their work report flow states that others who do the same work for external reasons never experience. It is not talent. It is not personality. It is the reward system firing at a higher level because the meaning level is higher, which means the fastest version of this process is not just starting small and completing consistently. It is starting small, completing consistently with something you genuinely care about. Not something you think you should care about. Not something that looks impressive to other people. Something that, when you imagine actually achieving it, produces a real feeling rather than a performed one. Because when that alignment exists, when the direction is right and the brain is being gradually recalibrated through completion, something happens that cannot be forced any other way. The work stops feeling like work. Not always, not perfectly, but often enough to notice. And the person who once needed to trick themselves into starting begins to find that starting is simply what they do. So to summarize, the version of you that does hard things without fighting yourself is not a different person. It is the same person with a recalibrated brain. And recalibration does not require extraordinary discipline. It requires something much more achievable. Repetition in the right direction. Small enough to sustain, consistent enough to compound, long enough to let the brain do what it always does: learn, adapt, and eventually, want. The brain that craves hard things is not built in a moment of inspiration. It is built in the ordinary moments, the ones where you start anyway, the ones where you finish what you began, the ones where you show up again tomorrow. Not because you feel like it, but because you decided that who you are becoming matters more than how you feel right now. That decision, made consistently, changes the calculation. And when the calculation changes, everything else follows. If this made sense to you, you already know why you're here. We'll talk again.